Testing, testing. There's a lag. Okay.
Negative comments. Well, this is the meeting of the Mtrac Committee for March 31st, so let's have a pledge of allegiance.
Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
So our agenda today is going to be a brief one, well, not brief, but short. A couple of items, and this is budget season, so we've invited our Chief Financial Officer of the city, Neil Young, to meet with us today and give us a good, juicy update on what the budget looks like, and especially with respect to the Mtrac issues that were raised, but also just going forward, a general assessment of revenue and spending. So, and we shared with the members of the committee Mike's message, so they have that already.
Okay.
All right?
Yep.
So we'll take it from there, and Neil, the floor is yours.
Yeah. So, as I know you guys are aware,
You have to stop talking. We have one more member coming in.
all good. So, I know you guys are aware that the budget's being introduced with a 0% tax increase, no changes to water sewer rates, no changes, I believe, to beach fees. I think that one got defeated. So at this point, there's no major increases in fees. We did raise the occupancy tax, which will be helpful for the future. We have not necessarily anticipated any of that in here, but ultimately in the future, I believe there's plans to utilize those new revenue sources to pay for, any sort of service that the city provides, but maybe buildings, maybe future things, capital issues, yep, police stations, whatever it might end up using to do so. Just as an overview, I brought the 2-year budget analysis. The current fund is about 21, almost 22 million. Beach utilities about 3 million. Tourism utilities just over 1. That one's starting to increase again as we get through the pandemic. And water sewer utility is up to 7.3 million. Total budget for the city, $33.2 million. So that's an increase of about $1.3 million over all those funds. So not a huge increase for the city, about 3 to 4%. Given cost of living's averaging about 7 for this year, we're keeping expenses the best we can to a minimum and utilizing our revenues instead of taxation to offset any of those increases. Tax rate itself.
Do you want to hold off questions until you finish?
Yeah. Well, no, feel free to interrupt. I didn't plan a lot, so I just brought a few of my major documents. And if you guys have questions, I'm happy to answer them.
So Neil, to go back to your, one of your earlier points about the occupancy tax, and maybe Stacy, you could fill some of the gaps in on this. So that money has not been earmarked for anything. It sits as a surplus.
Yeah.
I believe it was identified maybe about 800,000 potential.
So we're thinking the 1% increase to the hotel motel tax should provide about 800,000.
Okay.
And then we have this transient accommodation new tax that we've never had before,
Sure.
which is an unknown, but is it 300? Is it another 800?
Right.
We'll soon see.
Right.
I do have figures from January, and note that it's our lightest month. However, that occupancy tax is up 40 grand. So it went from 15,000 to 55.
For
You
what,
won't-
January?
For,
just
yeah,
one
for
month?
January,
From last year?
January's collections, and you'll get this report on the agenda.
Was that
City
including
Council.
the hotel and motel, or is
So
that-
listed was VRBO, Airbnb, and one other player, which I couldn't identify who it is. On that listing, it didn't really show individual people that are they reporting? That's going to be something that the city's going to have to figure out who's responsible. And this new mercantile thing will help with that process.
Right.
So the more people that are saying they're residential rentals, we're going to need to grab that list and advise the state that, hey, we've got much more than maybe what's being reported to us. They may need to collect that tax as well. However, if they're renting through a local realtor, they do not have to collect said tax.
Right.
So,
So, I'm sorry, just last January, I know a lot of the major hotels were closed, so to only be at 15,000, we were kind of almost at zero.
Yeah.
So
Yeah,
to be up
and
to
this
40
January too, the people were still closed as well. I believe Congress Hall closed, and you might know better than I, Callie, I think Congress Hall closes for January as well.
Yes, Congress Hall was closed all January. They reopened February 9th.
yeah, and I think that probably the only ones that were really, the big one that would have been open would have been the Grand. I mean, mostly everything else is, was still closed. And
Right,
you
so-
might see some things opening.
So we're really going to see this transient accommodation thing in the summer. Because when all are open, we're going to see that excess, and we're going to say that's transient accommodations for sure. Because last year we had one of our best seasons ever. So anything there and above, we can at least think that it's related to the transient accommodation.
Okay.
We don't get detail of who collects what. That's on the, if you need those records, you have to go to the state of New Jersey. We just get a total and the people who have submitted their tax,
Do we get a total from each vendor, or do we get one?
just a total
Oh,
of all, yeah.
Well, this is a shakedown year, I think, because we just have to figure out how this thing's going to work.
Right, yeah.
Whatever numbers we get become the baseline for future years.
So Neil, just so I'm clear, I'm sorry. So last January, we collected 15,000.
Correct,
That would have only been hotel and motel, right?
correct.
Right.
And now we're at
So
55.
now we're at 55,000. We don't know how much of the 55 is an increase in the motel, hotel.
Correct.
Versus transient accommodations, and there's no way to break that out.
Not from records that we receive.
Gotcha.
You know, if we pride the state of New Jersey, maybe they would provide that
If
information.
that's the case, then how do we know that the transient accommodations are actually submitting the tax?
So we do get a report, and at the top of the report, it gives you the total for the month. And then it lists the entities that have submitted their tax returns.
Okay.
And Airbnb and HomeAway are on there, and there's one other.
VROB?
Bourbon,
They're both owned by the same company, HomeAway and VRBO.
right.
So they're both on there. But there was one other one that I couldn't determine who it was. It listed the name, but I just don't recall it off the top.
But to Russ's point, we'll get that kind of detailed data.
We will not see, we can see who submitted, but we won't know how much they paid. That's all at the state level. We only get a total of, here's your total collections for City of Cape May, $55,000. Here's who submitted. Don't get the breakdown, though, of who paid what.
You only
Wonder
know
if
that
we
there's
could get
three
that from the
vendors.
state.
You don't know what
Wonder if we
percentage.
could get that from the
Exactly.
state.
I think you can get it from the state, can't you?
They've never given it to the city.
Have you ever asked?
We've never had VRBO before.
Yeah, but it's, even with the hotel motels, we wouldn't know how much each person
We
paid.
don't want each person. I think we just want VRBO and hotel.
We'd like major buckets.
Yeah,
Yeah,
two
I mean, we can
major
ask, but it doesn't
Yeah.
mean, this is
All
their
new
information.
territory, yeah.
No, I get it.
Is it operable? Maybe,
Yeah.
maybe.
We'll have Dennis say it.
Yeah, he seems to have the in, so.
So Neil, when you mentioned about the surplus unknown, 800,000 to, whatever the other number is, those are operating dollars, correct?
Yeah, they ultimately, if there's an excess, they would go help with operations, yeah.
Okay, so you talked about some capital projects.
They can, yeah.
They can be
Oh,
identified and
Yeah,
utilized for
occupancy
capital?
tax can be used for any purpose of the
Okay, it's
city.
unrestricted.
Unrestricted.
Okay, all right.
Well, no,
What about,
There is a tie to the tourism utility.
Well, only if you decide to, that's the city's choice. The legal opinion that we have is they can be used for any purpose.
and the same for the mercantile license? It's unrestricted funds that could be utilized for either operating or capital?
Not necessarily. Mercantile fees are only supposed to offset the cost of the operation,
Okay,
of
all right.
licensing them,
So-
including enforcement, but
That's uniform construction fees.
same with that.
Right.
But licensing the same way. Licensing should only be to offset the cost of the operation.
Like
So-
the salaries and everything.
Right.
Salaries,
800,000 could be
enforcement,
earmarked for
cost-
capital. potentially, where the other excess could be utilized for operations.
Correct.
Okay.
Yep.
all right.
Which is almost where they should be, the mercantile license, because that's what we raised them.
Oh,
for, to
yeah, sure,
cover-
but there are some instances in which operating dollars can never be used for capital, so it's nice to hear that they're unrestricted. There are many instances in which
Yeah.
you can't cross that line from
Yeah.
a fiduciary standpoint.
Right.
So it's nice that they're, it's permitted.
Right.
We're close to the issue that I wanted to, one of the ones I wanted you to talk about was the surplus
Yeah.
and why it's so large and growing larger.
Yes, well, mainly due to our tourism-related revenues coming in so great the past few years. So, occupancy tax is at its highest it's ever been, beach fees at the highest it's ever been, parking meters at the highest it's ever been. So, coming out of a COVID year where people were kind of constrained, everybody was out and about and trying to enjoy themselves.
People you have.
And in a tourism-related town, we benefit from that. In a rural community, they don't have that same benefit that the city has. They struggle, and it's only taxation that they'd have to raise every year to meet their rising expenses. Here, at least, there's other means to offset those rising expenses.
That being said, though, it's a pretty large amount of money, the surplus.
Yeah, we're at 9.8 million in the current fund, and it's growing. Probably 6 years ago, it was at 3. So we've been frugal on our spending, and the revenues have been great. So, it's definitely growing, and it's a good thing. I don't think we're, in the current fund, I don't think we're much higher than other municipalities that surround us. I know lower townships are in the 10 million range, and if we did, it might be a good idea to do that analysis to kind of see how we compare to other surrounding municipalities.
I think part of it would be to look at it as a percentage of the
Of the total.
budget.
Yep, exactly. That's how you would
See
do
how
it.
that also compares, not just the dollar amount.
Yep, and I think that the more important thing is when you go, when you're borrowing these funds for these big projects, the people that are lending you that money want to know that you're going to be able to repay. And even in a COVID year or in a natural disaster, you still have to repay that. So having some type of surplus of significance is important.
Right, yeah, having a strong balance.
Yeah.
What did we decide?
It's wonderful, really.
Going to that point, the police, the police building and the analysis on that, and has that gone out to bid?
The building itself?
Yeah.
No.
No.
Has I think I talked to you this before. Now, did the firehouse actually go out to bid that bond?
The firehouse building, it has been, we borrowed the funds, yes, to pay for the firehouse.
It went out for bonding, only because
Yes.
I thought it was
That was
for,
in
we were
s-
bonding for 5, and you showed me that bond was for 8.
Yeah, it
And
had-
that's why I was a little concerned.
It had some other projects, older projects that we're finally borrowing the money for. So that had multiple, I don't have the detail but it was
Yeah,
the
'cause I-
firehouse
Is that
and old
because
ones.
the interest rates
Yeah, the
dropped?
money was.
Yeah, oh, we got a great rate, 1.59%.
Well, yeah, but-
We'll never get that again.
Yeah, but the 9 million, or the 8 million that was in there for this bond, we only took out 300,000, roughly about 300,000. So is there capital projects that we didn't put that money to that we had earmarked it for?
No, there's capital projects that we've already paid for that we're now getting the money back by borrowing it. So we have in our capital fund various projects and open space money that we've taken from the taxpayers through the years that's accumulated. We use those funds to a certain point, and then we finally borrow for the projects that may be already complete. So the borrowing is just keeping our cash flow steady.
So you're just replenishing what you borrowed
Exactly,
internally.
exactly, yeah, yep.
Okay, so that 8 million that we bonded for last year, which was for the firehouse and other projects, we haven't,
You've completed some, you haven't completed the firehouse, obviously. We're using those funds to help pay for the bills for the building or for the contractor.
is there a reason why, because I know we put out almost, I think it was almost $1 million so far for the firehouse, but you said we only took out 300 so far from that bond.
I don't know where you're getting that from. The
From I
300.
approved the bills, because I know what we approved the bills for
Yeah,
the,
yeah, we
for
probably,
Duval and all them.
yeah, I don't know, have that number off the top of my head, what we paid Duval thus far.
I think it's like 750,000, I think. we
Yeah, and
paid
as
them.
those bills come in, we're using the money we borrowed to pay for those.
Yeah, but that's why I don't understand, if we are, then why are we only we only took out 300,000 from there and not the other money?
I don't know what you're talking about on the 300,000.
Well, when you showed me that 8 million bond,
Mm-hmm.
you said we took out roughly 325,000 from there.
Oh, you mean for the down payment? That's the down payment funds. So when you do a bond ordinance, there's a 5% down payment on each bond ordinance. So if it's an $8 million bond ordinance, you, the city, need to have 5% on hand to
Right.
pay down. So we, that's 400,000, and I don't have the exact figures in front of me, but that's the basis. And you utilize your capital improvement fund money to pay for that. You have to have those funds on hand before you can do a bond ordinance.
Right, right, but we already did that bond ordinance, I thought.
Yeah.
We did, right? So with that bond ordinance, we also take out, you were talking about coupons, and then that those coupons have to be put back in, and they could be at a different interest rate, correct?
Yeah, so the net interest rate on that bond ordinance is 1.59. When you do a bond sale, you sell for, say, $8 million. A bond borrower might give you $8.3 million. That 300,000 is what's called premium, and you utilize those funds to help pay down your debt service. So even though they might have given you a 2% coupon, like every bond payment, you might be paying 2% on it, you're utilizing some of that $300,000 to make it 1.59, okay?
And that, so then at the end, do the bonds go back to get reevaluate for the percentage or not? Is it still the same percentage?
Yeah, the bond, unless we do a refunding.
Okay,
But at 1.59, you're not going to do a refunding.
yeah,
You'll never get lower than that.
This process works like if you were building a house, a short-term construction loan
Sort of.
that floats ahead of the project to keep the project.
Yeah, and it can go both ways. You could have already spent that money through your own funds, and now you're asking to replenish it.
Yeah.
Or you can do it in advance like the firehouse, where we need to borrow all those funds so we can pay that bill. We don't have $5 million sitting here to be able to pay all that debt,
Somehow you need money up front of the
keep it
project
going.
to keep it moving.
to keep it moving. On these big projects, that's what you do. You always try to borrow in the front side.
So with the interest rates obviously going up,
It is.
as we all know, mortgage rates are up over 4% now.
Yep.
So what's the plan for the police station?
So that's what's been discussed, and I haven't fully been involved with the financial analysis of it all, but you talk to any banker, now's the time to borrow money.
That'd be the concern I'd have, is if
Yeah.
you don't get going on it,
Exactly.
it'll
So,
get worse, not better.
Why I was bringing it up,
Yeah.
wondering where things were.
yeah, so, if from a financial standpoint, borrow now because you don't know what later is going to be, and now is okay.
I'm not sure they have the land settled yet.
Yeah, there's some unsettled.
Yeah, and ultimately, you need to have all that before you can even
It is,
go through
it
it,
is
but,
challenging, but I think that there's probably, and the land is a major issue, but I would think that there might be an option B and C. There must be a scale that they're looking to, and there must be some type of an estimate on per square footage to
Yeah.
build, comparing it, at least in some extent, to the fire department. There are different needs, obviously, but, if you were just trying to earmark, knowing that the numbers are going to increase probably pretty significantly over the next 6 to 8 months on the percentages, what's the ballpark? Is it another 5, or is it more than that?
Right.
Because of the cost of, construction now might be, 20% higher than it was when the original
Cinder
bid came
blocks
in.
go up in cost.
Yeah.
Everything.
Everything goes up in cost.
and you see that the cost of,
Yeah.
the cost of living is at 7,
Yeah.
7 this year, so.
Yeah.
Well, the building of the convention hall, the financing of the convention hall was an example of how we sort of got into trouble by backing into a building to fit a number. And because that was the political
Okay.
mess around
Right,
them,
right.
that issue forced the city to cap it at the 10. And then they built back into the 10. And so what happens is you have a hall which doesn't have a lot of stuff.
No,
Now,
I mean, it's a valid point. It's just, I think there's going to be a real fine balance. At what point do you try and push forward and make a decision either on, ideally what the land would be, or ideally what the scope and size could be, to get some estimate of, where you're at, because
And you also at that point want to make sure that a building meets the needs of the police department for the next 10 to 15 to 20 years.
I'd
because-
say 20.
Yeah, because you know what, that's what happened with the convention hall. we have a hole that's now not as usable as it could have been if we had spent a little more money on it.
Well, and it happens in every, I mean, in healthcare, it used to happen all the time. As soon as we would finish a project and build something, we would sit there and say, we don't have enough exam rooms, we don't have enough, the space. And so, yeah, I mean, it is kind of,
I
it's
guess
a
the
fatal
best point
flaw.
of that, to illustrate that, is the Schuylkill Expressway.
I think you could say the Garden State Parkway and the Atlantic City Expressway also.
Schuylkill was declared obsolete a year before it was finished. So, anyway, so does that answer your question?
Yeah, it does. Although, I guess, I sort of read it in the report, but, so the 1.3 million, the planning on that was there any kind of assumption that, I know you didn't assume that you were going to get the new transient accommodation or even the additional 1% on the occupancy tax, is that right? None of that was contemplated in your budget?
No, we didn't, we've used, in the budget documents themselves, we used less than we've actually received in the prior year. So you can't, unless you get state approval, you can't ever utilize something that you haven't already received in the prior year.
That's like anticipated.
Correct. You can't,
So for 2022, your budget
our max could only be what we received in 2020.
in 2021,
Correct.
period.
Unless you get state approval, and we didn't go through that process.
But even if that's the case, wouldn't you also at the same time do a budget that's based upon, not that's a submitted budget for the state, but for yourselves or for internal purposes that says, here's what we really anticipate?
Oh, yeah, we have an idea of what we expect.
Now, let me give you an example. Besides the occupancy tax, et cetera, how about the fact that you've got a number of new homes being built?
Yeah, yeah. We have,
Those taxes will occur. That's going to come.
they're built into this.
They are.
Yes. The taxation of new ratables gets built into your tax levy calculation.
Okay.
And we've utilized that. It was $36 million more this year than last.
Okay.
Yeah, and it's been averaging about that, 30 a year
Can
for
they
the
do
last
that
good
before
5.
The occupancy is declared? The certificate?
Yeah, or is it based on permits and construction
What-
request?
What do you mean in detail?
So,
The
how do you
COA.
estimate a house is going to be taxable?
In October, the assessor has to give his values for the upcoming year.
Okay, well, I think we're trying to understand is how is that, information gotten to? What is utilized? Construction
What I was-
permits?
Yeah,
what I was
exactly.
saying was,
The-
does
the
it have to
addeds
have
from
its
construction
occupancy
permits is where it comes from.
certificate Before you can,
Right.
If they have a construction permit, then they would know. So for
Yeah.
instance,
Yeah.
you go down Pittsburgh Avenue,
Yeah.
there are a bunch of new homes being built, right?
Yep.
Yeah.
So if they get their
13,
permit.
14 of them, yeah.
Exactly.
if they're not finished.
They're not CO.
No, but they have a construction permit.
They'll go on to the next year's if it's not
Okay,
complete.
so they're not part of the 2022. I think we're.
That's what I'm
That's
asking.
what-
Yeah,
that's
if there's
what I
not,
was.
if there's a house that's not completed, let's get confirmation from the assessors.
So even though they have a construction permit, it doesn't go in. It's not until they're occupied.
Well, that's what I was saying. I
That's,
it a
that's
COA
the
or-
assessor's job, so I don't want to give,
right.
misinformation.
Because there's a lot, I mean, those are expensive, there's a lot of expensive property being.
Yeah.
Yeah, I
There's
think,
also, my concern is that there's a lot of property that are still, don't have a CO that they're utilizing.
Well, I
So-
think Lou tries to get out there and
Oh, yeah, he's been averaging a good 30
hot on that.
million.
Yeah, but I mean, I know there's some issues with like HPC and everything that don't have the official CO. So my concern is, are we losing out on revenue because of them not having
Yeah,
the CO?
that's something that, I don't know the details of who's assessed at what. That would be the tax assessor to be able to give you those
Of
details.
course, if they have to add 5 feet to the flood elevation for the house, some of this stuff may go away.
getting back to the budget itself in terms of revenue projection, it's helpful to look at the budget. There's 3 numbers that are helpful to give you a sense of what's really going to go on for the next year. One of them is what we budgeted last year.
Right.
What we're budgeting for this year, and what we actually spent last year. Those 3 numbers.
That's
have
important.
Right.
Got to be viewed in context. And it'll always be, and as Neil and I discussed this a long time, the revenue projections and the spending projections are always going to be to the extremely radical conservative side, I think.
Yeah, we've, historically, the city has been conservative in both sides. Yeah, definitely from the revenue side, our spending is in excess, what we have in the budget is always in excess of what we think we're gonna spend. And the point is, there's three numbers that are key in the finance world. You take the number that's listed as anticipated surplus in your budget. Ours is 3.4 million. Then it's how are we gonna generate at least that much? So that if we hit 3.4, you broke even. So you have excess revenues, and we've talked a bit about those. You have your lapsing appropriations from the prior year's budget.
That's a key point right there.
Yeah, so say we had $1 million left that we didn't spend from the prior year. That helps us. Excess revenues help us. And then miscellaneous revenues that you didn't anticipate. That's usually a much smaller number. Taxation is usually about $1 million. Our excess appropriations is in the million range, $1.5 million. So we're at 2.5. And then you have all the excesses, occupancy tax, parking meters, all those excesses to try to get to the 3.4. As of recently, we've been at the 5 and
Right.
so range, which brings us that excess fund balance and our growth. So we've been doing a great job in that aspect.
Is the 3.4 prescribed by the state? Do you have to have a 1% bottom line for your budget? Is that required, or is that just the fiduciary mindset of the city?
No, so you can do, that was our fiduciary
Okay,
mindset.
okay,
You can,
all right.
you can have whatever number, you can use all of your surplus to balance your budget.
Okay, all right.
As your cash surplus. You
Right.
can go up to as much as you have in cash.
Well, and there's some towns.
Bad policy, but
Some towns actually are doing that.
some towns actually by code, put a flat amount, no more than 50% will we ever utilize. And they use that as like a policy decision. I think it's a bad one because you can have things that will
Yes,
affect
the
that.
budget- The budget you send and the budget we send to the state for their review and approval is a frozen document.
Yeah, it's
But-
been this way. It hasn't changed since 12 years, it's looked exactly like this.
But the numbers are frozen too, and the reality is that our budget on the ground is a daily moving thing.
Yeah.
Unanticipated spending, more spending than we wanted to make, or a new project.
Right.
Depends on whether or not the revenue's there for it, so.
Is your budget seasonalized?
It isn't.
No,
It's
which
it's
is interesting because we're pretty much, for the most part, 9 months out of 12.
Right.
I'm sure, some place like Hoboken is 12 months all flat, the same, so. it probably
right.
doesn't-
We know what our seasonal expenses are, and we do budget seasonally, like internal stuff, but externally, it's flat totals. We do, internally, in those budget binders, yeah, you'll see the seasonal employees listed.
Yeah. Lifeguards, beach
Lo-
taggers.
Exactly. And our seasonal public works staff and police staff, that's all listed kind of in salary means, but other than that, it's kind of a totals type budget.
Also probably like water expenses.
Water expenses, some of the things that, obviously electric bills and such, when we're producing more water, are much higher in the summer season than elsewhere, but,
Same with revenue too, because water would.
oh, yeah.
be generated as well.
Yeah, and the hard part on that, on it, we're a little off track, but from the water sewer side of things, our big expenses are, from May to September, but we don't get the revenue from those 3 months until late October, early November. So we're kind of front-loading some of that expense, and then we get it all back.
Well, that's where the fungibility of the real budget comes into play.
And having a decent surplus helps you with cash flows.
So,
So-
Neil, if I could, just two questions. One, I know that you said, which is great, that you're trying to make the utilities so that it matches more up to the revenues, the expenses.
Correct.
So they line up better.
Yeah, and that's one of the things that Mtrac actually suggested, so I kind of took
So
that
when you
and
look
ran
at,
with it.
so when you look at that, if you look at your page here, the water, sewer, beach, tourism, so how did those change from,
I don't know what you have in front of you.
oh, I'm sorry, it's
We
the
have
city
Mike's-
manager's budget.
Mike's
Oh, Mike's
document.
notes, okay.
Yeah, you want
So water, sewer was 7.3, that's for 2022, so
Yeah,
how did that compare to 2021? Same with beach,
I have that document here. The current fund's up just shy of $1 million. The beach utility is up about and which is 4.41%. The beach utility is up about 8%. So we showed that we moved some of the expense out to the beach utility.
Okay.
The tourism utility, which lacks revenues, is only up 1%. And the water sewer utility is only up 1.38%. And that's mainly because we had a huge savings from the MUA this year, so we didn't really need to increase it as much as might have been typical.
Gotcha.
Where is that, the new rates for the Coast Guard and the other towns? When did that start getting collected?
That started, what was it, May of last year, I think you guys did it? Remember when we had that meeting? I think it was about May of
So
2021.
that shows up in this,
It definitely showed our
Let me
surplus
This
to...
way, the Coast Guard base wasn't paying up until February. so
Oh, yeah, we
they
actually
didn't
just
pay
collected a lot of it.
Until then, so.
But they paid us till
Goes up.
September, and then hit us in March for the rest of it, yeah.
So going back to the water and sewer, I think there was a comment made when you were doing your presentation at the council meeting, and Stacy, I think you commented on this, that there's a project that you've got earmarked for this year that's going to do an assessment of
Yes.
the water sewer utility, the lines, and the sort of any potential leakage and, you know, from endpoint.
Yeah, it's something that's been on like the capital suggestion list from the superintendents of water sewer through the years. And this year, we're getting at least a $500,000 savings from the Cape May County MUA on our billing. So we used or sent less waste to them as compared to what they estimated in 2021, which is weird because we had our busiest year ever. But they said we sent less waste to them. Okay, so what they do on your next year's bill is give you that credit.
Right.
And it's about a $500,000 credit. So my suggestion to management was, hey, we ought to do a one-time type project to get done within the operating instead of doing capital.
Right.
Because we'll have the excess funds to do so. And ultimately, an I&I study was what was suggested, and I think it's a good idea. You kind of look for all the water leaks that may be happening in town. The point of that is we're wasting money. We're spending money on electric, on chemicals, on staff, and we're just, that water could be leaking into the earth. So let's try
Help me
to,
for my own edification, I&I stands for?
I don't know what the first one is. It's
Okay.
infiltration and
All right.
something stuff.
Okay, I was trying to figure out. what
Yeah,
it
so
stands for,
the
but-
infiltration side is when water could be going into the sewer system and making it
Into the sanitary sewer.
sanitary sewer, not the, yeah,
Not- Okay, just so we can.
yeah.
Yeah.
Yep, and being processed and metered through for the Cape May County MUA, which might look like we have a lot more sewerage going through that we're
Understood.
being billed for.
Right, and,
The thing is,
yeah,
just the amount of rainfall can make a difference, because if there's openings.
Somewhere, yeah,
down,
absolutely.
It's leaking, infiltrating into
Okay.
the sanitary sewer. We're getting charged for it. because
Exactly.
They metered that water.
So did the MUA do any type of project last year? You know, if you're sitting there as the CFO saying, wait a minute, you know, we had our busiest year, I got a $500,000 savings.
Yeah.
Not going to question it, but, you know, it's a bit of a disconnect to think, did they figure out something on their side that, you know, thankfully we are now benefiting from?
Yeah.
And now it becomes an internal issue that
It could have
maybe,
been less rainfall,
okay.
Yeah,
believe it or not.
Yeah.
I've been doing, you know, in this for 11 years now, and I could never figure out how the Cape May County MUA, one year you'll get a credit, the next year you got an excess bill, then the next year you might
Okay,
get a
that's
credit.
It
interesting.
can be the rainfall.
Yeah,
Okay,
it could
all right.
be.
so,
So does that have potential impact for the end user, taxpayers?
This year, no. When you get those excess bills, maybe.
Okay.
yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
because I wanted to point out with the fact that, you know, as we make our own water, so we know how much we're putting out. So there is some kind of a balance that we should see.
Yeah,
If we're giving people 100 gallons, 100 gallons should be going back to MUA, roughly.
Yeah.
If they're getting 200, we have a big leak, you know, somewhere that we should be looking at. So there is a way that we can actually look at it ourselves and see what's going on.
Yeah,
And I-
and then there's the production, so there's a production number that they have in the plant versus what we've sold The difference between the two is the loss. Where's that loss going?
And we did have this
A lot of
calculation.
ideas, believe me.
And there was a calculation by Mott McDonald when they did a water study. So Mott McDonald did do a water study, and they did see it, and don't hold me to the number, but I think it's almost like 20%.
20 is the trigger, too.
Yeah.
From what previous water sewer superintendents have said, once you hit about 20 is when DEP thinks you should start looking into your system, because there's probably leaks somewhere.
Yeah.
And we're right around, we're 19, whatever it was.
Yeah, I couldn't really, and that was a couple years ago.
Yeah, we're right
But
around that number.
Doesn't the city, or the water department have some kind of water detection devices? That instead of, my concern is, why spend all this money for II unless you're going to look at certain sections and go in and fix them right away?
Yeah,
But
they
they're not
have,
gonna-
they have means, and I don't know all of them, but they do have means to detect leaks in systems and such, dyes and all kinds of other.
And that's what the 500,000 is going towards, is to
Yeah,
help?
we don't think it's going to be that much, maybe the 200 to 300 range, but
Well, that's a great use of money.
yeah, at least we would know. Right now, we have an unknown, so at least you would know if you're losing
I
water
found out we had
and
a leak.
there's infiltration.
If
into
it's
your
on
system.
average 20%, there's going to be areas that it could be 40.
Oh, yeah.
Other
Oh,
areas
yeah, absolutely.
5, target those, get the
Well,
40% fixed.
Yeah, because I know, I was talking with some people from the county, and they feel that there's this issue right there by the water tower with that pond. When it gets a
Okay.
little high with rain, all of a sudden they see an increase at the MUA. So that's the rainwater that we're talking about that could
How's
increase.
it going to get into the sanitary sewer?
I don't know if there's a manhole there that when it overflows, that it goes into it or not. If I knew, we could have corrected it.
There is a manhole there,
Yeah.
but it's, the lake or the pond is a lot lower. So what I'm saying is,
But it does flood there.
huh?
It does flood there.
Well, I'll take you over and show you the manhole. It's got to flood a lot.
Oh, I saw the manhole, yeah. It's high up. I don't know, but that's what they were telling me. Is it the manhole, or is there a broken pipe there that it's leaking into? I don't know.
Well, either way, it's a good,
Yeah.
sounds like a good use of funds. The other, if I could, I had one other question. So you have 9.8 million of surplus. Now, we addressed, I thought, this earlier, but a little bit. But, so where does that sit?
It's kind of like your cash reserve on hand.
Okay, and how is that invested?
So
So, and how will we take advantage of the rising interest rates as they go up?
well, it's funny you mention that. The banking industry, the banking industry really doesn't feel that interest rates on that end are rising too much because they have too much cash on hand and nobody's borrowing. So that's what our local institutions are telling us, that we're going to give you even less interest rates because we have too much cash and we don't know what to do with it. Why would we be giving you a lot of?
Well, there are other options besides banks.
Yeah, not as much as you think, because we must invest in only less than 1 year investments. There's
For
not,
the entire 9.8 million, you have
for
to,
every dollar the city has,
you're, by
law.
by law, you are not allowed to invest in anything that's more than 1 year.
367 days or something, yes.
Wow.
Yep.
Even if you took a penalty by removing it?
You're not allowed to get into an investment of anything more than that.
And this
We don't
came
want
up
to
a
see you
year,
go to jail.
this came up about a year and a half ago when we were talking about,
Yeah, it really ties your hands.
but the thing I think the city did when we talked about it then was to shop the money around.
Right, and we're kind of, I just got notification that our banking institution is lowering our rate. Therefore, we're kind of at that point. I've sent management my suggestions, and we kind of got to go in some direction because it's getting worse, not better, as interest rates appear to be rising.
Right.
But since they're sitting so heavy with cash and nobody's borrowing, they're not making as much money as they used to.
Let me go back to the water issue just a minute. Several years back, there was this big push, probably when you were mayor. That's how far back this goes. We had wooden sewer pipes. But there was a big push for water conservation. People were aggressively using less water, which created a lesser yield for the sewer tag and so the county MUA raised the rates so that they wouldn't lose money because
Yeah.
we were saving money. Now, Is that kind of thing happening now?
I believe it's in the code to do so. Is it really happening? I don't know if people are conserving or not, but it's in the code.
Environmental.
They can raise rates to cover their cost even though their use is down.
Yeah, ultimately, they need to cover their costs no matter what.
Commission said we gotta save water, conserve
that.
water.
Yeah,
So I know one motel had hundreds of toilets. They changed them all out to low flush
Yep,
toilets.
yep.
Somebody did it. Pretty soon, guess what? We weren't using as much water, therefore the bills were not very high.
yeah.
And we had a problem.
And the rates went up. That's something that
Well, that's what you had to do.
that's the taxpayers, that's something the taxpayers should be aware of, that when their rates go up, it's not because, it's almost like saying you're doing such a great job, we're going to charge you.
We're going to
more."
penalize you for it.
Yeah, and luckily this year, that was not the case.
Right.
This year, they gave us the nice discount. so.
But to the earlier conversation about doing this water leakage study, and to Bob's point, the MUA is going to look for a solid, a number, they're going to have to be within a percentage of that to know that they're going to be able to, make their budget.
Yep.
So to the extent that we're finding holes and gaps.
Yeah, sometimes it doesn't pay.
It could,
in the long
potentially
run.
not result,
It
unfortunately.
will on the water loss side, because that's all on us.
Right.
But on the sewerage side, you're right. Anything that's infiltrating into our sanitary is,
So I would like to ask, I'm sorry, Bob, I would like to ask that when that report comes back, that maybe we could get an update on it, because it would be important for us to understand the distinction between what could be saved on the water, leakage
Yeah.
side versus the sewer. Only so
Exactly.
that when, especially the Taxpayers Association, like.
yeah, and at this point, it was a simple discussion that was
Yeah.
had. It hasn't made its way to city council yet to go out for RFP or bid on the project. But I think it's a good one if city council so chooses to go forward with it.
Can I go back to a point Russ had brought up earlier? Could you give us an idea of some of the things that were rolled over into the authority budgets and away from the general
It
fund?
was mainly, and look, it's hard to do so because in the utilities, the revenues are kind of limited. The water sewer utility has a bit more room in it. It's $7 million type fund now. The beach and the tourism, $1 million and $3 million. As they shrink, it makes it harder and harder to push things into it without raising a fee to associate with it. What I had done this year was insurances, the GIF bill, some of that I pushed out to it. Health benefits, I tried to push that out to it. And it's not a lot, but we did what we could. And pension, I tried to push that out to the utilities as well, kind of allocating the cost of somebody's pension out to the funds where salaries are also charged to.
And I think that process, as it goes forward, is going to get better and better because you'll find more different things to put in. And it's also, I think, important as this committee approaches the issue of reviewing the relationship we have with other communities on shared service agreements, because we need to know, before we can even make a recommendation in that area, we need to know the full cost of every piece of service. And especially when we're contracting for police services. So all the stuff you're doing there is getting us closer to being able to have a cost-centered budget analysis rather than just a state.
Yeah, and I saw what you had provided, which is a good way to kind of gather that information and try to really see it. It may,
Just tell the folks what that is.
yeah, what Dennis had showed me is kind of something it's a decent idea to know exactly where somebody's cost would be associated with. So take,
So it's a fully loaded benefit rate. So you've
Yeah.
got a salaried employee at 50,000, the benefit rate's at 40%.
so the administrator,
Yeah.
where's his salary
Yep.
totaled? In our documents, I kind of show that out in the internal, but the history's been, it's been mainly salary and not all those ancillary expenses. So what Dennis is saying is maybe we should look at the operating expense and the health benefits, the
pension, everything, yeah.
You know, the
Pays them off,
insurances.
yeah.
Are we really allocating it to the right spot?
Usually it comes in around 40 to 42% on, average in most industries.
yeah, yeah.
That's what your benefit rate is.
Some of our
Fully loaded.
Some of our folks are over 100%.
Yeah, see,
They're paid only 30, but they could have a family health plan, which is also 30. So,
And our budget isn't structured to help that kind of analysis. Because our budget is like pensions, that's it, that's everybody's pension is in that one line.
what I think this will do is, it'll make folks realize, kind of the utilities themselves, are they paying their fair share? I think in some instances, you're going to see that they are, and in other instances, on certain lines, you're going to see, well, maybe more should be out to a utility than is currently. At that point, once you move so much expense out, do we need to raise fees to offset that cost? Because
Well, and the other thing, I think, going through the exercise this year, certainly for your management and administrative team, to start thinking about how their time is allocated
Right.
for those types of shared services, because it does help when you're sitting there, kind of just even as an exercise to say, how much time am I spending on city business versus this
yeah,
business
and
versus that?
I'm thinking of myself. That's hard to determine because the questions come in at random, the issues come in at random, you're reconciling at random. So putting a percentage is not so easy in all aspects, but you could get a
I
good
think
guesstimate.
you could get a fair estimate.
Yeah, and
Yeah.
after
not
the
gonna be
budget
perfect.
season is over in about a month or so, Neil and I are gonna work on that chart to get this, a spreadsheet that covers real full costs for every function we perform. And, you guys passed a resolution the other day, and it speaks to this kind of an issue, I think, because when a private organization wants to hold a festival or event, they want a policeman there. And historically, the city would say, give me $100. And that's just not the way to allocate resources. Because $100, what does one policeman cost for 5 hours is the way to do it. But
They may not even ask for $100.
Yeah,
You need a policeman? Here he is.
yeah, exactly, right.
Depending on the
That
event,
kind of
maybe,
an
yeah.
analysis gives us the ability to fund properly any service we perform for other folks. And I think we're heading in the right direction.
Just so, also, Dennis, what I just learned is that there is actually a trust fund that is for the overtime for the police, that it should be going into, and they should be paid out of that for special projects.
Yeah.
Well, I don't mean special projects,
Special events.
for anything that's paid by, like, say, the Langston Electric, with those,
Yeah.
that's where that money should be put into, and that's where it should come out to pay them.
Exactly, and we just started this discussion of true cost to utilities by saying that when there's a police car stationed at either end of an MUA project, who pays for that? The MUA probably should be paying for it, because it's for their benefit, so that's where.
No, go ahead.
Go ahead.
I'm sorry.
I'm done.
I was just going to take a minute and explain to everybody, maybe people looking in, the infiltration of water into the sanitary sewer. If you look at if you have a sewage problem at your house and the sewer line stopped up, you call the plumber. He goes usually to the front of your house and takes a cap off, and he takes his snake down there and he breaks the sewage up and it flows again. Well, what happens is those little caps, usually between the sidewalk and the curb, they get hit with lawnmowers, people cutting the grass and so forth. Now you get a heavy rain. The rain comes up over the curb, and guess what? That 3.5-inch hole, the water runs down there constantly.
Becomes a drain pipe.
It becomes into the sanitary sewer, which goes out, which the MUA meters. Now, that may not seem like a lot, but when you take areas like Froggy Hollow, Yacht Avenue, yeah, well, that's where his family lives, he said. But the old ones were cast iron, and when the lawnmower hit it, it would leave a hole in it. The newer ones now are plastic, and if they're set lower, they have a screw cap, which is tight. The water can't get in. But they're going to spend $500,000. The first thing they should do is take $100,000 and go around to each house and look at that cap or whatever it is.
I've done exactly what you said at my own property,
And
so
if
I know.
it is a cast iron pipe, instead of replacing it, I think there's like a rubber plug that you can put in there and you turn it, and it makes it snug. But I'm telling you, I'm not a hydrologist, but a lot of water can pass through a 3.5-inch pipe. And if you get 100 of them throughout the town,
Yeah,
and
we
heavy
have,
rain,
we have that issue
it
at our
don't
corner.
happen
You
in
saw the
normal
pictures.
rain, it
Where?
don't go over the
Our
curb.
corner,
Oh, yeah.
Half of those are already broken.
Well, yeah.
right there. Anytime it rains, it floods in that corner and goes into that pipe.
That's right.
That's the problem.
I just,
That might be just something that, could be some type of a project.
Well,
Internally to be funded, obviously, through, overtime for the guys with the public.
Well, they may be able to fund it in this money that you're
Right,
going to
that's what I'm
get.
saying.
Yeah, it could be part of the project, or our guys, if they had time on a slow day, could go take that block and go see.
It don't happen in every rain, but if you get a heavy downpour, it's over the curb. I know, I look down Columbia Avenue, it's over all four corners there, it's.
Yep.
Could I
Go ahead, Russ.
go back to, I'm not quite ready to give up on this yet. The 9.8 million.
He's looking for funding.
Well, the only reason I ask.
What are you looking for?
Well, no, there are other options that are short duration funds.
Sure.
That do have full liquidity. Now, you could lose money on it if you take it out at the wrong time, fair, but most of the time, that's not the case. And I guess my question for you, do you have an investment advisor?
We do have a financial advisor. They don't really invest.
Financial advisor or an investment advisor?
We don't have an investment advisor.
Well, it may be worth, even for a one-time fee or something like that, because you're getting up to, as you know, every 1% is worth $100,000. Again, just from a personal perspective, I can tell you for a fact that there are other options besides banks that do have flexibility, liquidity. There is some risk associated with it, but at least for a portion of this, it would seem like you ought, and some of them are inflation protected. Some of them are inflation focused. So,
I think that's an issue well worth this committee's recommendation and study. I agree with you.
just at $10 million and growing probably another 1.5 million this next year, you're talking about some real money.
Well, we have more than 10 on hand through all of we're about 25 to 34 at this point.
Well,
That's
you would
what
think
she
that we should take a look at it and see what,
Well, short
as a
term,
small percentage,
Short-term, it's
enter
probably
into some kind of a, investment
I think we
market.
should do it, but the issue I wanted to warn everybody in is we need some clear counsel on what can be done with the money we hold.
Yeah, it is limited. It is stated in the law, so there's law that guides us, which is helpful. Know that most municipalities only use a local depository because it's difficult. Other options that I've seen are certain municipalities actually borrow or buy other people's notes. So notes are for a one-year period. So say someone has a $300,000, $500,000 bond ordinance for buying X. We, as City of Cape May, can go buy Lower Township's note. But we're bidding against other big banking industries.
Sure.
However, we might not be looking as much as they are, interest-wise. A 1% for us would be great. They're looking for 2 right now. So
Exactly.
we could beat them out for sure. And I see it in these smaller municipalities. When we borrow, there's other municipalities that do bid. So it's something that we could get into, but it's you're going against other municipalities and big banks each
Who
way.
do you think we should talk to get a better understanding of this whole process?
First, I could just send around you guys the law, and then if there is some local investor types, maybe if you have friends that are in that industry and they see the law, then they might right off the top of their head have, hey, I've got 3 or 4 options that the city could utilize.
Is Leon a good person to talk to?
Leon is, ultimately, he could be one of them. He sees what all of the municipalities are doing.
Right.
But ultimately, he would probably have me just reach out to those municipalities directly. somebody in the banking industry is probably, or investment industry is probably better suited for it.
Well, I think a start is if you could get the law that we could all read it.
Karen,
Yep, I could do
maybe
that.
understood it.
Excuse me,
I'm sorry.
do we know how to turn off this camera? Stop
Okay,
streaming.
thank you.
Thanks.
Thanks, Karen.
I think that would be a start, though. if we-
Yeah, I think
Yeah, I
it'd be a
think it's a good
start.
one.
The other thing is,
The revenue side of things, it's definitely something that
Absolutely.
I've already posed the question to management where, with some options, and,
Would Chris guide us?
Gilman Schwartz?
Yeah.
On the law, but I don't
On
think
the law.
investing. is
Well-
necessary.
No, not on the investment, but I thought, you know, if
Yeah.
you're going to
well,
send us the.
first getting an understanding of the law. The other question would be, are there other larger municipalities in New Jersey that probably would have addressed this or thought about this well?
Oh,
before we did?
there definitely is.
And so would it make any sense to, if we know,
I could
you know what I'm saying?
Yeah, I could look up just some of the basic balance sheets of most of these towns. In their financial statements, they have to list their cash balances.
Right, and see what you see in there.
Exactly.
If they're going to a bank that's getting good interest, well,
And I'm not saying that banks wouldn't be an option, but I'm just suggesting that there are other index funds or not, performance funds that operate a little like a bond, but they're short-term.
Wealth management operation, rather than.
Correct.
Yep. Yep.
Yeah, income fund. I mean, there are other options out there, and again, I'm not sure if the law allows you to do that, but they are short-term. You are able to get your money
Yeah,
right away.
well, those will be some of the parameters you build into your arrangement with this.
And again, you may want to set it up so that only a portion of your surplus would go into this, just to
Absolutely.
start
Do we all like
and
that
test
idea?
it.
Let's pursue that.
I think it definitely should be evaluated and
Let's
pursue
look
it
at
to
it.
find.
I think that's a good one for you guys,
Right.
for sure. It fits into that revenue realm. Right now, it's getting us peanuts, so it is something that if you guys have the time
Anything we
to.
do to build that surplus.
What are you getting out of interest on average, would you say? 0.2? Less?
We just got reduced to .03.
That's worse than a checking account.
It was .12.
Okay, a couple other questions, anybody? I have a couple, if anybody has nothing else.
I just have one quick question, and I hate to go back to the sewer part of it, but with the Coast Guard base,
You're always in the gutter. What?
with the Coast Guard base, I know there's a question there on how we're calculating their MUA, and we usually just do it by how much water we give them, how much comes out.
Yeah,
And that's someplace where we should be looking at, that not more is coming out there, because that is a condensed area.
Right.
That we could be finding a lot of our leaks there.
And we'd have to talk to the
Well,
water
that's
sewer
an
office to
easy
get that
one.
detail.
Because we know the metered water in, and we know the storage out. And we can tell if they got a lot of leakage on that base.
Right.
And I heard a long time ago they did.
Uh-oh. I don't have that calculation, but a good idea.
So we have caps on spending, and we have caps on revenue,
We have caps on taxation.
and caps on taxation.
Right.
Not just all revenue, just,
Revenue, you're not capped, but you are capped on taxation.
and we are, and so we're way under both of those caps,
We are.
according to Leon and your analysis.
Yeah, so our levy cap, we're 383,000 under. So, and we have cap banks.
Yeah.
I don't have that detail, but
Sorry.
this budget itself is 383,000 under, and our spending is 532, just in this year.
300 and what?
We're under the spending cap by $532,000 with that extra ordinance had done. So that's your appropriations.
Right.
And we may have some cap bank, I don't have that detail in front of me, that accumulates for the prior years as well. If we didn't utilize it, it accumulates for 2 years. So we could have upwards of $1 million kind of sitting there that we haven't utilized and can by law. And then the 2% tax levy cap, just this year alone, we're $419,000 under. So we have the ability to tax up to that limit. I think in the budget document, it may actually have the banks right here. Yeah, so I not to be raised by taxation. We have the levy cap bank. Right now, we're at 1.2 million under our levy cap. So the city's done a good job by not going up against the max through the years, and you see that in your tax.
Builds up, right?
Yeah, you can bank it for, it looks like 4 years.
What happens after 4 years?
The last year lapses off
Unless you spend it.
unless you spend it. So that last, say, 2019 says balance to expire, 647,000. That'll expire next year, but you'll get the 419 added on that we,
So we would not.
Didn't use this
jeopardize
year.
our revenue at all by actually spending that amount of that last year that's dropping off.
yeah. And it's not spending it, it's not, we didn't tax it.
Right.
Yeah, and ultimately, I don't think you guys want
Is
higher
it
taxes.
real money, or is it just
It's
your?
just a calculation.
It's just a calculation. You're keeping it under, but it's not actual dollars.
Yeah,
that
so
you
by
have
law,
taxed.
we're allowed 2% minus some exclusions.
Could become actual dollars if you spend it.
If you.
If we
tax-
taxed it, we didn't tax it.
Yeah,
I got it.
yeah.
Now, so that, I guess this brings me to a question that one of the things that Mtrac is supposed to do is watch out for the taxpayers. And will we ever get to a point in this rosy scenario here where our tax rates would decrease?
You could with the
It
survey.
could. It ultimately could, but that's, I rarely see that in this industry, because ultimately you want growth. If you're able to grow and reduce the tax rate, great. It seems like what most municipalities do in those instances is try to provide a better service instead of reducing tax rate.
I'm for beautifying the town.
Me as well.
When you say growth, do you mean, I just need a clarification.
As a
Growth as in
surplus,
houses,
no,
more-
surplus, really. As a financial business that, that we are, growth to be able to pay for things and ensure we have money as the economy grows to help offset those bad years. That's the key. That's what your
Or
surplus is
maybe
really
if we
there
have like a storm come in and wipe out
for.
certain
Wipe out half
things.
the town.
That we would-
How are we going to fund it? Yeah.
Able to fund a service such as figuring out, an alternative to our current parking situation.
Yeah. Ultimately, yeah, if there's one-time projects that you want to get done, at least you have a bank of money that you could use.
What's
You
happening
didn't want to
in
borrow.
Cape May is that our rateable base is growing significantly, dollar-wise. And so to say that we're not going to raise taxes this year is not, is not all that important, because the property values are so much higher. At the same tax rate will generate enough money to raise the spending plan by 3 or 4%.
Theoretically, we'll get to a point where there won't be a lot of new buildings, so we won't have the,
Well,
know.
I'm no
Well, I'm not
fortune
either.
teller,
I'm not either.
but there's a kind of, Cape May continue this growth pattern of not just bigger houses, but bigger hotels and bigger commercial development.
Well, and
They're the ones, you all pay the same tax rate.
Right, but housing is a supply and demand issue. Housing costs, and the prices of homes are going up because there's so much demand.
Yeah.
So houses that might have been, $400,000 only, 3 or 4 years ago are now going for $700,000. And, or they're buying something that's really not even, a house, they're buying the land and they're just gonna knock it down.
Tear it down.
And for 1.2 million and put a $2 or $3 million house on it.
Yeah, but
So,
a lower tax rate, if it was something real, might encourage someone to not move out of Cape May because they can't afford to live here.
I agree with you. I think that's going to be a tide, that's going to be a little bit of a challenge. And I think to Neil's point, I can't imagine, and you were in the business side too, Dennis, sitting there and presenting to a board and saying, we're going to reduce it this year, and then next year having to go back and say, oh, by the way, we've got to go back up again. It becomes a little bit of a short-term, win and, a longer-term problem from a.
Is there a limit on the amount of surplus you are allowed to hold?
No limit on the amount you can have.
So you could have 100%, 200% of your budget
It's rare,
in
but
surplus?
you could, yeah, ultimately.
I have a concern that somebody had brought up to me that, are we at the years where Lou is going to reassess all the properties in the town, and then people's taxes are going to be increased next year?
Yeah, so ultimately, the county tax board usually pushes that issue onto the municipalities. I haven't heard that that's coming, but ultimately it could at any point.
And I think we need to be very careful about that whole issue.
Right, because I think that's where you have issues with these older people that are retired that can only make, their income is very limited.
Yeah.
So they can afford the taxes now, but you increase that tax rate so much, they're not going to be, and we're going to
Yeah.
be losing less people.
Well, what
as
typically
residents.
happens in those instances, so we don't scare the public, if your assessment did increase, so if everybody's assessment did increase because we're way undervalued, the tax rate would go down to adjust. We only need so many dollars, right? So as your assessments go up, the tax rate would go down.
That's what I thought.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, but some people will get in, so say one house is underassessed by 30%. and
Yes.
So say one house is underassessed by 30%, and some are 20%, and some are 10%. Obviously, the 10%ers aren't going to have as much, or the 30%ers are not going to have as much an increase as a 10%er.
Right.
Because when they do those adjustments, it's a fine balance of.
Do you look,
We're
do you
talking-
compare houses in, from house to house to house to make, I haven't done it myself, I should, to see
The
how,
market value.
The assessor's
It's-
office
it's just-
is who
yeah,
tracks
it's
that.
crazy.
Hey, you know
Sorry?
what, though?
Some of the what's out there with regard to the estimates on homes in the city. I mean, it's 20 to 30% each month they're going up.
You can't go by the assessed value that's in place now.
no, I recognize that.
Yeah, the market
No, I was
value.
wondering,
When you did those empty lot surveys, there was an empty lot, let's say, that was assessed at $6,000 or whatever.
right,
And when that $2 million house gets built on there, that assessment goes to $2 million.
right.
And so the tax revenue from that property goes to 10% of the 2 million. So it's a huge amount of new revenue coming in, even though your tax.
Well, that was why I was asking about all those houses on Pittsburgh Avenue, because
Yeah,
those
that's-
were,
I was wondering-
I mean, that should add a lot of revenue for the city.
It will, but here's something to be careful of if you want to talk about reassessment too, because we're in the unfortunate situation of having our share of the regional school district budget calculated by our assessed value.
Right.
And so if we revalue with all these million-dollar houses,
The key is to let Lower Township revalue before we revalue.
that's right, so you want to let them, because our tax, our,
That's real, though.
our tax rate may go down for our municipal budget, but it's going to go sky high for the regional budget, which is like, what's about a third of our tax bill goes there anyway.
Where is that, have we heard anything more about going to, trying to see if we can get any kind of credit for
We
the
had the
Coast
meeting,
Guard?
yeah, we had the meeting with Van Drew, laid it all out to him. Haven't heard anything since. You guys haven't heard anything. You passed a resolution supporting the issue.
Because it would seem like that would be a worthwhile thing to follow up on. I don't know, who would be responsible for following up on that? It would probably be Mike.
Yeah.
Don't you think makes sense? I mean,
Makes sense to me.
Well, it's been several months. Elections
just
are
to
going to be coming up, so, it might be a good time to.
yeah, I mean, why not?
The elephant in the room is the budget right now. We need to get this budget squared away. Get-
One other question I had on it's sort of related to the budget, as well as what, the fact that city's considering electric-powered police patrol cars. I assume that the city is taking full advantage of the grants and incentives from the state of New Jersey and all that
I
stuff?
believe they've applied for two different ones, or at least we're looking into two different ones. The chief was looking as well. We have some former residents of the community sending us some things of electric vehicle replacement ideas. And ultimately, we're going to try to get as much as we can to help all.
Because there's a lot of money there in the state.
Yeah.
Yeah,
yeah.
I have a
And we see it, and our grant consultants are aware as well.
My question is, with the electric vehicles and the grants, do we have to get the grants before we purchase the vehicles?
It depends on the grant, yeah.
Because a lot of
Some
times
are
what we're
that way.
doing is, we're purchasing stuff before we get, instead of waiting and see if we get the grant.
Yeah,
And
certain
we're
grants
losing
are.
money, I think, at
Don't
those
we only
points.
have some grant money in hand for the construction of the stations?
I don't believe we do, and if we do, it's recently received. I know they were, as we were talking about the potential of police
I thought
vehicles.
we
There's a lot more than that
Yeah,
that's out there.
Right, I mean, but my concern, though, when I brought that up as council.
No, it's a fair point.
With the electric vehicles, is it's a 24/7 operation. You're buying an electric vehicle that has to charge for, say, 8 hours.
Yeah, you need a charging station.
But how feasible is that for a 24/7 operation? Because now you're going to have to buy at least an extra car or two to cover the fact the other ones are charging.
I think
You
the
can get the
hybrid-
fast chargers that charge your car in like 30 minutes.
These cars aren't going to be the fast chargers. I think only the,
No, there's a Tesla-style supercharger for non-Tesla cars.
What's the turnaround?
I don't know on the non-Tesla ones, but
I think it's
do know
overnight.
that- Well, my friend has a Tesla, and he stops at the banks of the superchargers, and it takes about half an hour.
well, that's a Tesla, though. We're not buying
I know, I'm
Teslas.
telling you
No, but I
that
think the
they
charging-
have the same thing.
No, I think the
for
charging stations
non-Teslas.
do have that ability, and when I read it, I only read it briefly, but when I read it, it seemed like there's federal money that went to the state that's significant, and that money can go to those kind of charging.
Yeah, it appears what they really would like you to do is if you currently have a transportation-related vehicle, if you had a trolley or something that was gas-powered, they'd like you to convert it, and they'll give you the funds to convert it. So in this instance, that's kind of what we're saying. We have police vehicles that are gas-powered. Let's convert them. So I think we would qualify under that circumstance.
Who in the city is responsible for going after those grants, writing them up?
We have Jim.
Yeah, the city council hires consultants, and the management oversees it.
All right, so look, our concern is revenue, obviously, and properly spending the revenue. And you know what we've done over the last year and a half. What other areas would you point us in?
On revenue side of things, I think a good one would be investments. It's not going to be a huge number, given that the interest rates aren't, at one point, we had 2% easy that we were receiving, but it will be much better than we're getting right now. Right now, we're at the lowest that I've ever been at.
I cannot believe that you're at .03.
Just happened the other day, yeah.
That's
Yeah,
unbelievable.
just happened.
That's
And the convenience of our local branch is great for our operation, but doesn't mean all of our funds need to be in one basket. And I think you've said that in the past, Stacy, and that we're at the point where we have to look elsewhere.
And one of the elements of the ordinance that passed concerning residential rentals was another recommendation of ours, which would be to annually examine all fees, the amount, the use, the purpose,
Right.
and make recommendations. You would make recommendations that we could review, I guess, every year, October, I think it is, to make sure that these fees, some of these fees probably ought to be eliminated, some of them should be raised. So you're getting ready to do that with us after this budget cycle. I
Yep.
think we should start that review.
Yeah, the summertime is when my time kind of frees up. We get through budget season, audit season, and then I have a bit of time before I get back into budget season, but
But Dennis, didn't we already, I thought we already,
Did it at a very, very,
high level?
yeah, and we
Thought
can look at those
Increased
things.
all the fees.
We looked
no,
at,
we recommended that everything up 20%, but then we started pulling issues out of that.
yeah.
Oh, so that never got implemented?
And we might want to think just, you guys thought big picture to big items, and there might be some small items to kind of, that was the point from the start, that certain ones have not been raised in 17 years or something, and you guys brought that to light, which is good. When you get into the minutia, you might feel like everything's working fine, our revenues are pretty good, you don't really look at needing those funds. And from a political standpoint, every time you raise a fee, they are looked at for what they've done. So sometimes let's leave it alone. And then, like the mercantile license, you're not looking to generate money in many of these areas as well. You're looking to offset the cost of the operation. And by law, you're only allowed to do so. So even though something hasn't been touched, maybe it shouldn't be touched, is the ultimate reason why it wasn't.
And one of the other recommendations we made was to make sure that the city is properly staffed and equipped and organized to enforce these new laws and to make them effective, make them not just effective in collecting them, but enforcing them going forward. What in this budget helps that process, or is there anything in this budget? I guess what I'm asking is, Are we staffed appropriately to do these new things?
So there's no, like, new code enforcement officers planned in said budget. In this budget, there are a few more police officers. There is a floater that is helping administratively in all offices, which I can see the relief on certain departments already. The clerk's office, who is very busy right now, that person can go and help for the day when they're really busy. We just had beach tags on, today's the last day to get your pre-sale. We had that floater in there helping with tag sales. So it is helpful to have extra bodies around. But from the enforcement side of things, minus police enforcement, there was no additional, like, code enforcement,
So you
like
don't have a,
inspectors.
I'm going to use the word, a compliance officer, or you don't have an internal auditor?
We don't have an internal auditor. We do have a HPC, like a compliance officer.
That's really I think
for
what we're
historic.
talking about is somebody who's going to be doing the checks and balances on some of the things that have been put into place.
Yeah, and ultimately, that's,
And we do have a compliance officer.
we do, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah,
that
but I
goes
think this
out.
is more, I think this is more quality control, so.
Yeah, I think that's management's responsibility, and having extra bodies to help ensure that it's done is what's
Right.
key.
So maybe, I mean, Dennis, maybe what we need to ask is, will there be some type of a random audit at the end of this, process with the mercantile license to check, to make sure that, houses, that people, in fact, who are advertising for their homes have complied?
That would be one of the things, but there's a lot of different things that need to be,
Oh, I'm just using that
Yeah,
as
I
an
know.
example.
Yeah, and ultimately, I can assist. I'll be able to see from a monetary standpoint. The clerk will be able to see from the detailed how many number of applications came in. And ultimately, we could start that guidance, and then we just need somebody, and maybe an additional body searches the VRBO, Airbnb sites to see, are all of these items on here? Just having that extra hand is actually very helpful.
I guess my point is, you've pretty well documented the fact that we're flush, and there's money there, there's needs there, and do we want to see some spending to get those needs, use that money to get those needs properly addressed?
Yeah, and I know I keep pointing out just having an extra hand. The floater position or an extra staffer just in this building alone has, I see benefits, and ultimately that person could help with whatever you guys are suggesting. Yeah, especially what you guys are saying as well.
All right, any other questions, committee members? We've taken Neil past his time he promised to give us, so we always do that.
Thank you, Neil.
You're welcome.
Thanks a lot, Neil, appreciate your work, help. We'll be talking about that spreadsheet soon. June.
That's soon. June is soon.
Yeah. Anything else for the good of the order? Anybody?
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's not an uh-oh.
Is it
Could
meeting
we,
schedule you want to talk about?
yes. Are we gonna do it every 3 weeks now, starting now?
Do it every 3 weeks,
Starting now.
today,
Starting today, every 3 weeks, right?
3 weeks, okay?
Okay. So that means, just so we're all clear,
It is.
Every third Thursday,
So that's April 21st.
thank you.
April 21st?
That's
Is
the
that
next-
3 weeks
That's
from
3
now?
weeks from now.
Okay. I will not be here. I will be in Chicago.
Oh, you're not going to be?
I will not be here.
I know, but
Have our meeting in Chicago. then. You're coming
Don't
back,
worry, you
aren't
can
you?
call in. We'll let you call in.
I might be on the airplane at that time.
She's not that.
All right. Well, anyway,
all right, well, so that would be good. So every 3 weeks, starting now.
okay. Anything else?
That's good.
I'll send you the, that spreadsheet Neil was talking about, so you get a good idea what that looks like.
Are you going to follow up with to figure out whether we can get from the state anything as it relates to the
Yeah, I will.
I would think they'd be able to break it down to
Yeah.
at least hotel and, yeah.
Yeah,
Between the two, I would think so.
I think it's available. I know the woman up in Treasury who helped us out with the occupancy tax last time, and I think that's probably where we can go with that. She's
Yeah,
very
because you do need that number.
Yeah, no, you have to know, you have to know where,
Most definitely, it would be extremely helpful to have an.
For a yearly basis to see too if it's going up or down with it.
Right, and in
Yes.
which bucket also,
Yeah,
would you-
exactly.
Would you see an increase in, verbo and a decrease in your occupancy because of people are doing house rentals versus staying at hotels. You know,
Yep.
and it would be important to understand that.
The only other thing on this railroad track stuff going on, so is the park, I thought we already had approval for some.
No, we didn't. I mean, this is off the topic, but,
Well, that's why
Yeah.
I was turning my.
okay,
Okay, we're gonna go off the meeting?
yeah,
Okay.
yeah. All right.